calling it all a political sham, even a witch hunt. They're making it clear that they are standing by Donald Trump in the lead up to 2024. And Terry, we talked about this. I was at that rally in Waco, Texas. I talked to a lot of Trump supporters as well, and they told me, indictment or not, they are voting for him.
He has that quality. He himself said he could stand in Fifth Avenue and shoot someone, and his base would still be with him. And they've demonstrated through thick and thin that they will be. And Rachel, I do want to follow up, on the politics of this. There's always been a sense in the Congress, your primary beat, that behind the scenes Republicans sang a different song when it came to supporting Donald Trump. And I wonder, do you have a sense whether or not Republicans on the Hill, might quietly welcome this, because Donald Trump has dominated their party, and they've lost when it came to supporting Donald Trump. 2020, and I wonder, didn't do as well as any party in history. Do you have a sense whether in 2022 Republicans on the Hill? And I just wonder if they might quietly welcome Trump's, because Donald Trump has dominated their party.
Well, there has been a series of wake-up calls,
and they've lost
and notably
three
with
elections,
the midterm election, where we saw a series of Trump-backed candidates
didn't do as well as any party in history in 2022.
Democrats ended up winning a lot of those seats, and Republicans were expecting this massive red wave that didn't happen. Well, there has been a series of wake-up calls, and notably towards the midterm election, to January 6th, we hear Republicans definitely in the Senate say this is not losing the general election. Democrats want to concentrate on our agenda. We want to concentrate on what we are going to run on in 2024, not necessarily focus on the attention kind of towards back to January 6th there. But we hear Republicans rare that we're seeing in the Senate say this is not what we want to concentrate on. We want to concentrate on our agenda. We want to concentrate on what we are going to run on in 2024, not necessarily of the Republican Party. But I do sense some frustration, especially among voters as I travel the country. I travel the country a lot during the midterm election, the Republican Party and I've traveled the country a lot ahead of the 2024 presidential election. What we have seen and I've talked to some voters who say they are to the side of the Republican Party, sort of drama that has played out surrounding the former president, among voters as I travel the country. I travel the country a lot during the midterm election, people like Nikki Haley, and I travel the country a lot ahead of the 2024 presidential election. Who's not yet announced his bid for the presidential election in 2024. Sort of drama that has played out surrounding the former president, and that is exhausting. This is not the headline that Republicans want to see from the leader in their party. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's not yet but they do want to concentrate for the presidential election in 2024. That the House passed today. So you do get the sense, Terry, that definitely that's not the focus of this conversation because of this historic indictment, Terry.
Rachel Scott, thanks very much for that experience on the campaign trail as well. Let's go to our political director, Rick Klein, on this. And Rick, you were talking about this a little bit earlier. Donald Trump has said publicly, well, I don't know what he feels obviously in his heart, but that this could be good for him. And there are those among his supporters who think this will galvanize support for Donald Trump. And I just wonder, he's also always been a figure who gets attention, lives off attention, not attention for his ideas necessarily, but really for the spectacle of him. And this puts him right in the middle of the biggest spectacle you can imagine. How do you read whether or not this helps Donald Trump politically?
Well, Terry, I think one counter to the argument that a Republican strategist offered to me recently, he said, look, find me a Republican voter somewhere in the country who isn't for Trump right now, but will be the day after an indictment. And if you're not adding in politics, you're subtracting. Now, for Trump's backers, the 35% perhaps of the country that is a diehard MAGA card-carrying Republican for Trump, they're basically unshakable. And will this bind them further to Trump? Yeah, I could certainly make that argument. But For the rest of the country, including Republican voters in primaries, by the way, is this something that makes them more likely to want to support Donald Trump? Maybe they felt like this is politically motivated, but maybe they feel like that's kind of the point, or why you need to move on if you're a Republican. We got some initial reaction just moments ago from Governor Asa Hutchinson, the former Arkansas governor, a likely presidential contender. Look, he said we have to wait for the details to come out, but as a general principle, elections, to your point earlier, Terry, should be settled at the ballot box and not in a courthouse. I think it's going to be a tightrope for some Republicans to walk in the coming days and weeks as more details come out, potentially a trial gets launched. But there are Republican candidates who are making the case either subtly or much more directly that it's time for Republicans and time for the country to move on from Donald Trump. And the image of a president under indictment, potentially standing trial for criminal charges in at least one case before an election, is something that they will be using as a political argument against Trump.
You know, and Rick, while you're here, how about Joe Biden? How does this indictment of the man he defeated in 2020, on whom he staked his presidency, the theory of the case for the Biden presidency was he was going to restore the soul of America, get past Trump. How does this impact Biden, do you think?
The biggest argument for Joe Biden to run again, as all intents and purposes he's likely to do so, is that Donald Trump is still out there. And any perception of Trump's political strength, as we've seen in the polls in recent weeks, makes the case for Biden that much stronger. I think Biden has to be careful on this. He doesn't want to step into the details of a local prosecution. We also are waiting for the special counsel. We're also waiting for a special grand jury report out of Georgia. There are other things that could come out. And I think the Trumpian thing of kind of dancing on the all over the political grave or potential political grave of an opponent is not something you'll see from Joe Biden. I think he's going to probably take pains to stay out of this, knowing that the process playing out is something that plays into his political hands. I think a less electable Donald Trump is something that is going to be a good thing politically for Democrats who want to defeat him again.
All right, Rick Klein, thanks very much. The political stakes very high. Obviously, right now, the legal stakes for former President Trump and for the Manhattan DA is what we're talking about. Let's bring in ABC News legal contributor Kim Whaley again. And Kim, you know, there's been some dismissal of this case as a mere bookkeeping case. They caught him falsifying, misentering of a financial record, you know, in his business records, and that really isn't what an investigation of a former president should be for. First, do you think that is a minor matter? And in this case, was it worth pursuing?
Well, of course, Terry, we don't know exactly what's going to be the indictment, but that seems to be what the assumption is. And, you know, a few points. One is that this is not an unusual charge in terms of what happened in Manhattan in the criminal justice system. This is not the first time someone's been charged with a felony for falsifying records. But to the extent to which, and again, we don't know, but if in fact what was being falsified were his former lawyers' lies in business records about receipt of repayments, or Donald Trump's, the lies in connection with Michael Cohen, who received repayment for the payment to Stormy Daniels, and it was booked, or it was cataloged as legal fees, as a legal retainer. We have to ask ourselves, why was it done that way? Because it was hiding something. It was hiding a campaign, a contribution, one might argue, that led to his achieving the highest office of the land, led to him being in the White House. Do we want people who are running for office to be incentivized when they're running for president to tell the public the truth, so that the public, maybe it wouldn't have made a difference if the public knew about Stormy Daniels? But I would say, you know, if it's illegal to cast a vote, you know, things like this that affect the outcome of a presidential election should be scrutinized, even if it means potentially criminal action.
And that's what we're facing right now. I want to go back to congressional correspondent Rachel Scott with reaction from the Speaker of the House.
Yeah, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Terry, just gave his first initial comments to this indictment moments ago. I want to put it on the screen for you. He just tweeted, that Alvin Bragg has irreparably damaged our country in an attempt to interfere in our presidential election as he routinely frees violent criminals to terrorize the public. He goes on to say he weaponized our sacred system. And then he said the American people will not tolerate this injustice, and the House of Representatives will hold Bragg and his unprecedented abuse of power to account. So there you have it from the Speaker of the House, echoing much of what we have heard from Republicans on Capitol Hill, clearly backing up the former president, rallying to his defense here. These are the first initial reactions that we have coming in from the Speaker of the House. Terry.
All right, all right, Rachel, and quickly and finally, what is your forecast for the temperature in the House of Representatives, in the Congress, given the already polarization there and now this indictment?
This certainly turns it up, Terry, just to put it quite simply here. I mean, there's no doubt this will send a lot of shockwaves through Capitol Hill. We're seeing Democrats and Republicans alike comment on this indictment, but we are heading into a presidential election cycle that is already extremely tense, with a Republican field that could be very open. And we're talking about former President Donald Trump, who's accused of inciting a riot, who has impeached twice, who is now running for president, and is facing multiple investigations, including this indictment. This is something we have never seen before, especially ahead of an intense political election, Terry.
All right, Rachel Scott, thanks. One final thought from our political director, Rick Klein. Rick?
Terry, it's important for everyone to take a beat and to pause as much as we can in the midst of breaking news. This is historic. Any kind of punditry or predictions around it are likely to not age very well in the coming weeks and months. This is going to play in a lot of unpredictable ways. It is going to course its way through American politics. We are now in a situation that's never been seen before, with a candidate who's, as you've mentioned, challenged norms at every step of the way, and now has a new norm that's been challenged against him or shattered against him with this indictment. I don't think that anything that we think we know is going to prove to be true in the coming weeks and months. And I know a lot of people that are very smart observers of politics are making the same observation, that let's just wait a beat and see how this plays.
Very good advice. Uncharted waters for the country, no question. Thanks very much, Rick Klein, and all the others who have contributed to this report. Thanks for streaming this. I'm Terry Moran. We're going to have full coverage right here for you on ABC News Live. Again, history tonight. For the first time, a former president indicted by a New York grand jury earlier today. ABC News Live Prime with Lindsay Davis starts right now.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us. We begin tonight with that breaking news, the unprecedented and historic indictment of former President Donald Trump. He is, of course, now the first former president in U.S. history to ever face criminal charges. The former president is accused of paying $130,000 in hush money to porn star Stormy Daniels in the weeks before the 2016 presidential election. Prosecutors have accused him of falsifying documents and violating election laws. Trump has announced that he is running for president in 2024, and he is the current frontrunner on the Republican side. During a campaign rally in Waco, Texas on Saturday, the former president was highly critical of Manhattan's District Attorney Alvin Bragg, once again calling the investigation a witch hunt, insisting he will be vindicating and saying, quote, "The thugs and criminals who are corrupting our justice system will be defeated, discredited, and totally disgraced." Of course, this is just one of several criminal investigations into the former president. He's also under investigation in Fulton County, Georgia, over his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And there's a federal investigation into his handling of classified documents and his role in the January 6th attack. Trump has denied any wrongdoing in all of the cases against him. So what does this all mean? Our team is standing by to break it all down. Investigative reporter Aaron Katersky leads us off tonight from Manhattan.
Tonight, a Manhattan grand jury voting to indict Donald Trump, making him the first president in American history to be charged with a crime. The investigation, which has been going on for years, involves a $130,000 hush money payment to porn actress Stormy Daniels in the closing weeks of the 2016 campaign, a payment Trump initially said he knew nothing about.
Did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels?
But the former president's one-time fixer and lawyer, Michael Cohen, says he made the payment to Daniels at Trump's direction to silence her before the election. Trump's legal team now acknowledges the payment, but says Trump was trying to protect his family, not his campaign. Trump says he didn't have an affair with Daniels and that he didn't do anything wrong.
From the beginning, it's been one witch hunt and phony investigation after another.
In recent weeks, the former president stepped up his attacks on Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, warning of death and destruction if he's indicted and urging his supporters to protest. The NYPD is stepping up security around the court in Lower Manhattan, putting down barricades, all in preparation for this very moment.
And Aaron Katersky joins us now from Lower Manhattan. Aaron, the grand jury has now handed up an indictment. So what's next? What can the American people expect to see unfold in the coming days?
It is unprecedented, Lindsay, so we don't fully know. The indictment remains sealed. We don't know the specific charges, although, as you've alluded to, the grand jury was considering evidence of whether Trump falsified business records when he allegedly booked the payment to Stormy Daniels as routine legal expenses and not what Michael Cohen says it truly was, which was something done to protect his election chances in the closing weeks of the 2016 campaign. The Manhattan DA and Trump's legal team are going to have to work out a date for Trump to present himself here at court. He'll be processed, perhaps fingerprinted and photographed, although we don't know whether those steps would be necessary for somebody like Trump. And then he will have to appear in court to enter a plea. Whether we see that with cameras in the courtroom is a decision for the judge in real time, so we won't necessarily know in advance. And then whether the former president chooses to make any statements or not, we don't fully know. But his lawyers tonight are calling this a political prosecution. And security around here is stepping up because we know the former president has talked about his supporters protesting on his behalf. Those protests haven't materialized so far, but every member of the NYPD has been told to show up in uniform starting at 7 a.m. on Friday, just in case, Lindsay.
And Aaron, you've previously stated that falsifying business records is a misdemeanor. Remind us what it would take to ratchet this up to felony charges.
So here in New York, falsifying a business record is typically a misdemeanor. It can be bumped up to a felony if the business records were falsified in order to commit or conceal another crime. In this case, that could be a federal campaign finance violation. It could be a state election violation. Either way, those are untested legal theories. We can't find a prior case where that kind of justification has been used. To be clear, we don't fully know what legal theory Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg has been operating under because he hasn't spoken at all about his thinking toward the case. But legal experts we've spoken to say if indeed they are going to try and bump up a state misdemeanor to a felony based on a federal campaign finance charge, that may not even pass muster with the judge.
Aaron Katersky, I know you've been on this from the very beginning. We thank you so much for your reporting.
Thanks.
And let's bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl. John, when can we expect the former president to come to New York in order to face these charges?
Unclear exactly when this is going to happen, Lindsay, but we know that before this happened, the Secret Service had been in talks with the law enforcement officials in New York about the logistics of such a handoff. We expect the former president, will turn himself in. He will go through that processing that any criminal defendant has, go to the arraignment, but unclear exactly when that would happen. But I would expect it would be soon.
And John, just put this all in context for us. We keep using the term unprecedented, but how striking, how unusual is this moment to see a former president facing criminal charges?
Well, we've never seen that happen before. Never in all of American history have we seen a current president or a former president indicted for anything. But more than that, Lindsay, and that's a huge moment to take a step back and consider the implications of that. But also, this is somebody who is currently the leading candidate for president on the Republican side. So it's not just a former president, but somebody who is actively running for that office once again. So this criminal proceeding would be taking place against the backdrop of an active presidential campaign. Again, something that we've really never seen before. And especially significant because this isn't the only potential charge that Donald Trump faces. We know there are at least 3 other active criminal investigations underway, 2 of them by the special counsel with the Department of Justice, federal investigations into his handling of classified documents, and all the events that led up to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And of course, there's the Fulton County, Georgia investigation that has advanced very far. We don't know what's going to happen there, but it is not inconceivable that he'd be indicted in Georgia as well on charges related to his efforts to interfere with the election in Georgia. So we are in entirely uncharted waters, Lindsay.
Yeah, so this is possibly the first of several others. We'd have 46 presidencies in our history. Never seen anything like this. Jonathan Karl, our thanks to you. Now for the president's reaction tonight, I'm joined now by ABC News executive editorial producer, Mr. John Santucci, who's covered Trump since the beginning of his first White House run back in 2015. John, of course, you spoke directly with the former president following this news. What did he have to say?
Lindsay, I did speak to former President Donald Trump, and he tells ABC News this is an attack on our country. He called it political persecution. And, Lindsay, he went on to say that they are trying to impact an election. Obviously, an election that Donald Trump so far is the only announced Republican candidate for president for 2024. Lindsay, I then asked the former president, Mr. President, do you plan to turn yourself in, come to New York? His response to me, Lindsay, you take care, John, and then he hung up on me.
Aside from the fact that he hung up on you, what was his tone while you guys were talking?
It's interesting. He sounded rather relaxed at first, almost kind of like you have your cell phone in your hand and you just suddenly pick it up. He sounded relaxed, and then as we were getting into the political persecution part of the conversation, the tone got more and more intense. More and more intense. And I've unfortunately been hung up before by the former president. So when I did ask that question about coming to New York, I could tell I might have hit the nerve.
And we've heard him say, or his attorneys indirectly say in the past, that this was not about hiding anything from the public. This was simply to protect his family.
Yeah, he's called this a standard business deal, if you will, something that he says many people do. I don't know anyone that's ever done this. I don't think you would either, Lindsay, but those are Donald Trump's words, not mine. He said it was to shield his wife, his children from embarrassment, his company, and others, and it was done, as Aaron Katersky just reported on this program, weeks before the election, and that is the heart of this case and this charge. We don't know exactly what the charges are, but this indictment brought by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office.
Not only do we have the insight from what you heard from him directly on the phone with you tonight, but he also put out a lengthy statement. Give us a sense of his message responding to this indictment on paper.
Well, again, Lindsay, it is the same words he said to me via phone. He is angry by it. He has called it a political persecution. A witch hunt is a phrase that we've heard Donald Trump use over and over again. And he also points to the fact that this is one in a series of multiple investigations. And as John Karl just alluded to, there are several. Obviously, Manhattan is the one that now we have action. We know of a special grand jury that had months long of work that was completed down in Fulton County, Georgia. We're waiting to see what happens there. And we have one, but 2 investigations by the Department of Justice, that special counsel Jack Smith looking into documents that were taken by the former president, and January 6th. And that case in particular, Lindsay, as we've been reporting, has heated up a lot in recent weeks, because that, though it is obviously centered on January 6th, the day we have covered, we saw the images that day, it is actually what happened in the moments after Election Day 2020 and leading up to January 6th. What was Trump and his team doing to try to overturn the results of that election? Obviously, a lot of questions remain. We know that executive privilege has been a key focus of special counsel Jack Smith's investigation, trying to punch through that wall. And we know that in our reporting just last week, Lindsay, at least 8 former top officials in the Trump White House, they have been compelled to testify in that case.
And we know that your reporting has just been invaluable throughout this whole ordeal, really. John Santucci, our thanks to you.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Stormy Daniels' attorney, Clark Brewster, just released this statement. The indictment of Donald Trump is no cause for joy. The hard work and conscientiousness of the grand jurors must be respected. Now let truth and justice prevail. No one is above the law. And let's turn now to our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas. Pierre, as John laid out there, this isn't the only investigation into the former president. Give us the state of play on the special counsel's probe into Trump's handling of the classified documents.
Well, it's in operation on two fronts. As you said, the classified documents investigation is very straightforward. Bottom line is, did President Trump intentionally take those documents from the White House, and did he obstruct efforts to get those documents back? That's the heart of the federal investigation on that front. The other investigation involves looking at this whole issue of what was the president's role in the insurrection that occurred on January 6th. Two fronts on that. Number one, was he involved in the violence leading up to the attack on the Capitol? What was his role in terms of this whole issue of the certification of Joe Biden, the fraud that some people allege took place in terms of that they knew that President Trump had lost the election, but were still trying to imply that he had somehow won? This whole issue of fake electors in terms of people coming to Washington to say, no, no, no. President Trump won the election, not President Joe Biden. That is the focus, and I'm told the heart of the heavy focus right now with the special counsel. And Lindsay, what you're seeing in recent weeks is that Jack Smith, the special counsel investigating this, is being extremely aggressive. He's pushing the courts to pierce executive privilege for some of the top aides around the president and even his attorneys in order to get to the basic facts so he can make some decisions about whether to prosecute or not.
And we also, of course, have a completely separate investigation into the former president's role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Where do things stand there?
Well, that investigation, again, has been proceeding for many, many months. Heavy focus in terms of people like John Eastman, his attorney, private attorney that was working on that case. Heavy focus looking at this whole issue of who was involved in this plan to suggest that these fake electors could come to Washington and be installed instead of those for Joe Biden. So that investigation is proceeding. The one thing that they're emphasizing, Lindsay, is that these investigations are totally separate from what was happening in New York. And obviously, growing out of this real concern that followers of Donald Trump who are angry might resort to violence. There's no specific incredible evidence of that just yet, but they all are very aware of what happened on January 6th, and they're taking it quite seriously.
Pierre Thomas, our thanks to you as always. And we've received a statement from Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, who says that he made the hush money payment at the center of this case and also testified before the grand jury. The statement reads as follows. For the first time in our country's history, a president, current or former, of the United States has been indicted. I take no pride in issuing this statement and wish to also remind everyone of the presumption of innocence as provided by the Due Process Clause. However, I do take solace in validating the adage that no one is above the law, not even a former president. Today's indictment is not the end of this chapter, but rather just the beginning. Now that the charges have been filed, it is better for the case to let the indictment speak for itself. The two things I wish to say at this time is that accountability matters, and I stand by my testimony and the evidence I have provided to the District Attorney of New York. Now I'd like to bring in ABC News contributor and former federal prosecutor Con Nowady. Con, give us your assessment of all this.
Well, first, I'll say this, even though it's been said many times, this is unprecedented. I will take the admonition that we should all take a beat and see how this plays out. But first off, I think it's going to be a tough case for the Manhattan DA as a legal matter because of the novel legal theory. I do think defense counsel will move to dismiss the indictment in some manner. And I think in all likelihood, they'll probably lose. But I think there's a colorable argument to be made. Second, I think if DA Bragg survives the motion to dismiss, I think he does have some strong proof to prove his case.
Now, you say that you believe that he has strong proof to prove his case, but I've also heard that when you were in the position before, you guys opted to pass, that you had all the same information and decided that there wasn't enough there. Why did you opt to pass at the time?
And that wasn't me personally, but it has been reported that the Southern District of New York had looked at this case. And of course, we all remember Michael Cohen pled guilty to a federal case on the same facts. So you have to imagine that the federal prosecutors already looked at some of these facts and decided that they weren't going to bring a case. And while as a legal matter, that doesn't affect whether DA Bragg can bring the case or not, but I think it is something that defense counsel for the former president will make hay of.
Also curious, I've been hearing from people on social media and family and friends wondering, will this stick? What are the chances that this indictment will go through, that there will be a trial, that we would see an escalation between this or the other investigations that are open against the former president at this time? What do you think the odds are? I mean, you had said before when we were interviewing months back, you thought that an indictment would come. It wasn't clear which case exactly, but I am curious, if you look in your crystal ball at this point, what is down the road?
Well, with this particular case, it's going to move forward. And Donald Trump is presumed innocent. His defense counsel, he has very capable counsel who I've litigated against before. They're going to put on a great defense for him, and it's going to play out, and it's going to be put to the test, just like every criminal case is put to the test in this country every single day and decided by a jury. The other cases, my view is they're not impacted by this case happening. What is impacted, though, is you can see Donald Trump, you can think of this as there are storms offshore that have been brewing around Donald Trump for these past years. Well, one of these storms has landed. So it's going to be hard for his defense team, for his team now to defend against this storm that's landed and the other storms, these other investigations that are offshore.
A lot of storms certainly brewing out there. Con Nowadays, our thanks to you as always. The Democratic National Committee has just released a statement on the indictment, and it reads, no matter what happens in Trump's upcoming legal proceedings, it's obvious the Republican Party remains firmly in the hold of Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans. We will continue to hold Trump and all Republican candidates accountable for the extreme MAGA agenda that includes banning abortion, cutting Social Security and Medicare, and undermining free and fair elections. I want to bring now in our Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, the former chair of the House Intelligence Committee and a member of the January 6th committee. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Let me first get your reaction to this historic news of a former president facing criminal charges.
Well, it's a sober moment for the country. I think about people that have occupied the Oval Office, the dignity they brought to that office, and how this will be tarnished by the conduct of the former president, by his being charged criminally. Now, he was already twice impeached, but nonetheless, this is an historic change in the history of our country. I do think that if the grand jury found probable cause to believe that he had committed a crime, and they evidently did, and the Manhattan DA believed he could prove it beyond reasonable doubt, they had an obligation to go forward. It's important, I think, for the establishment of the rule of law that we treat everyone equally, whether they're a former president or an ordinary citizen. So I view this as an affirmation of the rule of law, but nonetheless, a pretty sad day historically that we see a former president who is brought up on criminal charges.
And we've seen the former president respond already, calling this a political persecution, a witch hunt. Any concerns about the timing of this happening going into the start of another election year?
I think you have to be guided by the facts and the law, and you have to set aside the political calendar, do what the law requires. I think that's the obligation of a district attorney, and I think that was done here. How this cuts politically, I really don't know. That to me is very secondary. What's most important here is, are we treating this man as we would treat any other defendant? And that ought to be the standard going forward throughout the prosecution as well. He will try to make hay of this. He is already doing that. He will try to use this, obviously, to enrage his base. And we saw on January 6th what a danger that can present. His suggesting that this day, this indictment could bring about, in his words, death and destruction, once again underscores how irresponsible he is. But I think the charges, if the evidence is there, are merited, and we have to watch the rule of law play out.
And speaking of the rule of law, Congressman, not sure if you'd know exactly the answer to this, but it seems at one time the RNC was paying for the legal fees for Donald Trump. At this point, now that he has announced that he is in fact running for president in 2024, is that no longer an option? Has that been taken off the table and he personally has to be responsible in all of these various cases against him for the legal fees?
I don't know the answer to that, both as a matter of law, and I don't know the answer in terms of what the RNC would do. I have to suspect that the RNC will make the decision it made several years ago and even more recently, and that is they'll do what Donald Trump wants them to do. If they want Donald Trump to raise money for them, then they will do what he wants, particularly if they think he may be the nominee again. But what a terrible waste of resources to spend money that way. We also saw Donald Trump raise a lot of money purportedly to contest the election results in court and not use it for that purpose. So there's also the chance Donald Trump raises money for this and uses it for a whole host of other things as well.
And what about the merits of this case? Do you think that the Manhattan DA is on solid ground in pursuing charges over these hush money payments?
It's difficult to say without, being in the grand jury, hearing the witnesses, hearing the evidence. But what we do know is that the Justice Department felt that the charges were serious enough that Michael Cohen needed to go to jail for his role in a conspiracy in which he was directed by individual number one. Now, that individual we know is Donald Trump. And so as a matter of justice, if the guy who is directed needs to go to jail, then the guy who did the directing shouldn't get a pass. And we will find out how strong the evidence is. But I think as a matter of following the law and equal application of the law, this is the result that was required.
As we mentioned before, you did serve on the January 6th committee. We know that the probe into the former president's role is still ongoing. Do you anticipate charges against Trump will come out of that?
I certainly believe that he has committed offenses, federal offenses, and that charges should come, but I don't know whether they will come. I'll also say I think the Department of Justice has moved very, very slowly in its investigation. It's more than 2 years since the events of that day. And I think if we were in a logical system, and we're not, the most serious charges would have been brought first and been brought by the Justice Department. And I think the Justice Department only has itself to blame for moving so slowly, for moving quickly when it came to the foot soldiers, but for moving very slowly when it came to those most responsible for trying to overturn the election.
Congressman Adam Schiff, we thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on the show tonight.
Thank you.
And let's bring back NABC's Aaron Katersky from Lower Manhattan, where the grand jury has been meeting. Aaron, just moments ago, we learned when the former president is expected to surrender.
We've been learning that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and former President Trump's legal team have been discussing a day for Trump to come here to court to present himself, and that's expected to happen, we've learned, early next week. The day currently under discussion is Tuesday of next week. No date has been firmed up. The Office of Court Administration will be the ones to firm up the date, but it looks like Tuesday of next week is when former President Trump will present himself here at court to be arraigned on this indictment. It will remain sealed, Lindsay, until then, so we still don't know the specific charges until Trump makes that first appearance in court.
We see just over your shoulder significant police presence. The barricades are up. Of course, the former president had made it popular, that mantra of lock her up, when talking about Hillary Clinton. We've subsequently heard people suggesting that Trump himself should be locked up. I know that you also talked about the NYPD, that every officer is supposed to report for duty as of 7 a.m. tomorrow in uniform. What kind of sense do you get that there will be protests, either for or against?
The former president called for protests on social media, and those calls were not heeded. We didn't see any large-scale protest at all. Once this indictment has been returned, which it now has, maybe that changes, and I think that's why the NYPD wants to be on alert. They're calling every member of the service to be in uniform starting at 7 a.m. for potential deployment around the city. We think a good many of them will remain right here in Lower Manhattan to be around the courthouse. Ever since the former president's social media message calling for protest, the courthouse has been ringed in these metal barricades, and there has been an extra presence of court security officers. And in particular, that followed a death threat to Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who received a letter containing a white powder and a message that said bluntly, "Alvin, I'm going to kill you." At that point, court security had enough, and they put more officers on duty, not only outside to patrol the grounds, but also inside, especially in sensitive areas where prosecutors working on this case were sitting and where the grand jury was meeting. In fact, the other day, Lindsay, there was a woman with a knife that was threatening people wearing a Trump T-shirt. She came from Alaska or somewhere else out of state. Court officers immediately confronted her, and she's now facing charges of menacing. So they are taking no chances, even though those calls for protest have not materialized.
And when you say, Aaron, that they're taking no chances, and you may not know the answer to this, but we had been given guidance initially that the grand jury was not going to be reconvening on Trump this week. Do you think, I mean, can we speculate that perhaps that was for security purposes?
Well, we had never really reported that the grand jury wasn't meeting on Trump this week. They were expected to hear some other matters, but we were always cautioned that they could be brought to bear on the Trump case at any time. And I think that, you know, the grand jury conducts its business in secret, as you know, Lindsay, so it was always impossible to get a good read. They did have some days off coming up for Passover and Easter, but could be summoned back at any time. Why the indictment was returned today, we don't specifically know, but that apparently is when prosecutors felt the case was ready to be brought. We should say, I've confirmed with sources around here that the indictment was returned today. The vote occurred today, and what made that so? The sources don't fully know, but we know in recent weeks they heard from plenty of witnesses, including one for former President Trump, and then a kind of a rebuttal witness, David Pecker, who was the publisher of the National Enquirer, and by then prosecutors felt that they had all they needed to get an indictment out of this grand jury.
And we know that we haven't heard a lot from Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, but you do have a new statement from him. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this statement comes from his spokeswoman, Danielle Filson. Bragg, by the way, just left under police escort, and that is befitting his newfound security. He always gets a security detail with him, but there was even more so around his vehicle as he left the offices here. And his statement said that this evening, we, meaning the district attorney's office, contacted Mr. Trump's attorney to coordinate his surrender to the Manhattan DA's office for arraignment on a Supreme Court indictment, which remains under seal. Guidance will be provided, the statement says, when the arraignment date is scheduled. And as we're now reporting with the help of my colleagues John Santucci and Catherine Falders, the discussion is for early next week, likely on Tuesday.
Aaron Katersky, our thanks to you as always. And now let's head to the White House with Stephanie Ramos. Stephanie, what, if any, reaction has there been from the Biden administration?
Well, Lindsay, the White House has declined to comment on this, and we will likely not hear from them on this tonight. And that's not unusual. They have largely stayed away from this topic, saying in the past that they would not weigh in on ongoing investigations. But when we asked them today about the indictment, they referred us to the DNC. You saw in that statement from the DNC where they really focused on some issues and not really that indictment. But as far as the White House tonight, they are not saying much, Lindsay.
And so then I guess we can assume that the White House has also not weighed in on the possibility of someone facing criminal charges and running for president.
Not necessarily. They've been asked before, and what they've said is, in President Biden, they asked, the press is asked in the press briefing room here at the West Wing if President Biden believed it was okay for someone who was indicted to run for president. The White House saying that they would not engage because of the Hatch Act. The press secretary saying they are not going to give any analysis, foresight, any kind of decision or thoughts on that because they are covered by that Hatch Act. So not going to speak about politics. And it could be seen as political if President Biden, for instance, were to comment, or it would be seen as celebrating Trump's indictment. Lindsay.
All right, Stephanie Ramos from the White House for us tonight. Stephanie, thank you. The Republican National Committee has issued a statement saying when our justice system is weaponized as a political tool, it endangers all of us. This is a blatant abuse of power from a DA focused on political vengeance instead of keeping people safe. For more now on the potential political implications of this indictment, let's bring in ABC News political director Rick Klein. Rick, former President Donald Trump is running for president, as we know, in 2024. What are the practical implications of this prosecution on a Trump campaign?
Well, first, the broad brush on this, there's nothing that stops an indicted or even a convicted criminal from running for office. Nothing that makes it impossible for President Trump to run again, even if he is in the midst of an indictment or a trial, or even if he is convicted. There might be practical limitations on his ability to move around the country, depending on what a court decides. There might be an inability to campaign as vigorously because of the lack of attention. But as a practical matter, this could be background noise that President Trump, former president, is already turning into a fundraising appeal and could use it to his political advantage. His statements tonight claiming that this is all part of a witch hunt. His team has been predicting for weeks now that this is only going to make him a stronger political entity. So we'll see how his rivals react to it. But in the immediate aftermath of this indictment, there's nothing that necessarily harms his pretty considerable political standing.
Because, and I'm being a little redundant here, but as far as our forefathers were concerned, you just had to be 35 and born in this country, and barring that, you can run for president, correct?
That's right. And it's fair to say that they never really anticipated this before, but there have been instances in history, including a Socialist Party candidate, Eugene Debs, who ran back, I think, in the 1912 election, who campaigned in part from a jail cell. It's possible to cast votes for someone that's in that situation, even if we're a ways away from this. This has never happened before. We've never had a president indicted before. We've never had a president potentially standing trial, presidential candidate potentially standing trial in the midst of the campaign, which again has brought up some of the political fallout and the accusations to say this is an unprecedented effort to try to do something through the legal system that should be settled at the ballot box.
It does seem that the former president is almost embracing this, calling it a political persecution. How could that play with Republican voters?
Well, he may have no choice because it's happening anyway. But I think the early indication so far in the polling in the last couple of weeks is that the former president is a stronger candidate than he was just a few weeks ago. Ron DeSantis' numbers have been dropping a little bit, which Trump himself has taken note of. Embracing this, being in battle, being in the fight, maybe it helps. The flip side of that, though, Lindsay, is that it's hard to imagine that there's many non-Trump voters who are suddenly going to decide that they're supporting him because he is under indictment. This isn't a good thing. It's a cloud that is now, even if he ends up being exonerated, it's a cloud that follows him around. And what we've heard from many Republican voters, even many who voted for Trump twice and liked the policies, is that enough of distractions, enough of the noise. I've been hearing from strategists tonight who are saying the same thing, that the quiet thing to say right now, but maybe the accurate thing for some Republicans to say is, why do we need to go back at this? Why do we still need him to be a candidate when there's so much out there, whether it's right or wrong? He just is not the same political entity that he was 8 years ago.
And we've now heard from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. You just brought him up, saying that his numbers have been dropping, but of course one of Trump's potential top rivals for the 2024 GOP nomination. He's put out a statement. Give us a sense of what he's saying.
Yeah, look, he's saying, like many Republicans right now, that this is a prosecutorial overreach. He's questioning the motives of what he views as a far-left prosecutor. And he's, Lindsay, going one step further. Keep in mind, Donald Trump is now in the state of Florida. He's a Florida resident full-time. He switched his residence while president. And Governor DeSantis is the governor of Florida, saying he will not help in any extradition requests that are issued out of New York. Now, the case may be moot, as Aaron Kotursky and others have been reporting on our team. This is not a case where extradition is likely to be needed because there is a negotiated transfer and a negotiated arraignment that could happen. But to me, it's an effort by DeSantis to insert himself in this and to send a clear and unequivocal message to many of the same voters who he would need to attract to his campaign that whatever his political differences with Donald Trump, he doesn't view this prosecution to be a legitimate one.
And I am curious about that, Rick. I mean, he isn't an opponent, unannounced yet, but many speculate, obviously, that he is going to run. Why not use this as something to say, oh, look at that. You know, is this what you want? You can have this, or you can have me, right, who doesn't have the allegations of these hush money payments to a porn star. Why do you think that he is still kind of aligning himself and going along that same road that Trump is suggesting that this is a political retaliation?
Yeah, Lindsay, you get just a glimpse into the future Ron DeSantis. If you look at the response he had a week or so ago when everyone was waiting for this indictment to happen, DeSantis said pretty clearly, like other Republicans, look, I don't think this is the right thing for a prosecutor to be doing. And then he went a little bit further in saying, look, I don't know anything about hush money payments to porn stars, that sort of thing. I think it was really going out of his way to remind people of the unsavory nature of the underlying allegations. And maybe he's trying to have it go both ways, but it was one of the more intriguing political moves we've seen from a guy that just hasn't done very much on the national stage yet. It struck me that he knew how to get under Trump's skin, and that there's a lot of stuff right now that might not be discussed in Republican circles that would be fair game in a Republican primary.
Rick Klein, we appreciate your time and insight as always.
You bet.
And now let's take a look at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, former President Donald Trump's residence. As we learn, he is expected to surrender early next week in Manhattan. Not much movement there from the waterfront, at least, but we can imagine lots of activity inside. I'd like to bring in our senior national correspondent, Terry Moran. And Terry, we spoke with John Carl about this earlier, but of course, we have never seen anything like this. Just big picture this for us. Put this in historical perspective as far as what it means for the country to see a former president face criminal charges.
Well, Lindsay, you've heard it plenty. Uncharted waters. And if I could extend the nautical metaphor, they're going to be rough seas as well. There's no question that this indictment, whatever you think about it, whatever side you're on, pours gasoline on the raging fire of polarization in American politics. This country has been sharply divided. Donald Trump, since he came down the escalator, has been the dominant figure in American politics and dividing the country ever since then by the nature of his program for the country and by the nature of his personality as well. That was his point. That was his aim. And it's one of the reasons why his supporters, so many of them, love him. And yet, where this journey takes us, and no one really knows, if you look at other countries, it puts us in very unhappy company. Countries where former leaders are indicted by members of the opposition political party after they leave office generally tend to be unstable countries. Countries where the government and where the political system and where even political unity is breaking down. This is something that you see around the world. And it is a hard lesson to be learned. So much depends now, because of those political stakes, those very basic political stakes in our country. Can we hang together through this? So much of it depends on how the legal system works. The legal system generally works very well. I mean, people do get, under the rules of evidence and under the rules of law, they get their day in court. Donald Trump will have that. And while we are saying now that Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, is the first person to indict a former president, Donald Trump may become, depending on the case, the first former president acquitted of a crime as well. That would have major impact politically and legally, but it depends now on how the legal system conducts itself.
And when we talk about the legal system, I mean, this is the result of a nearly 5-year investigation. Do you think that the fact that this has taken so much time at all gives any fodder or support to those who are saying this is all just political, this is not real, there's no there?
It does, Lindsay. I think if you are a supporter of Donald Trump, you are looking at this indictment brought by a man who ran for the office to use the power against Donald Trump. He boasted that he had sued Donald Trump before, and that was a qualification for him having this office in order to investigate Donald Trump. That's generally not the way Americans, they may disagree a lot, but they understand at a very primary level in their understanding of our country that that's not fair. That's not the way the law should work. Now, The Manhattan District Attorney will have his day in court as well and present what he presumably believes is a solid case and a legitimate case and the right case to bring. But yes, the way this prosecution was brought and the nature of the prosecution, Donald Trump is accused of paying $130,000 through an intermediary to a woman to have her keep silent about their affair. My hunch is he's not the first wealthy New Yorker to do that. And the question is this the right use of prosecutorial resources in this case, especially given the political background? So yes, the tangled journey of this case to indictment is already obviously inflaming a country already inflamed. It is once again up to the prosecutor now in the legal system to reassure people as much as he can that this was the right thing to do.
But just a quick follow-up to you there, Terry, because I guess the question is, what if campaign funds were used to make that payment? Does that make a difference?
Well, since they were personal funds, and Donald Trump did finance much of his campaign personally, that's the question. It would be a violation of federal campaign law, and generally, local county attorneys don't enforce federal campaign law. The precedent, if in fact this is the theory of the case, we have to see the indictment.
Sure.
The precedent of this is the prosecution of John Edwards, who paid hush money to the woman who had his baby through an extramarital affair. He had it paid by a third party. And the federal prosecutors went after him saying that's in effect a campaign contribution. The jury rejected it. And legal experts on both sides of the political divide in those days thought that was a stretch for prosecutors to do that. And the jury rejecting it means they got what they deserved. So this is by no means, if it is in fact the federal campaign law involved, this is by no means an easy case for Alvin Bragg. But he has brought the indictment, which means he believes he can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
Always appreciate the academic discussions with you, Terry Moran. Thank you so much. Joining us now is senior lecturer at Yale Jackson Institute for Global Affairs and former FBI agent Asha Rankapa. Asha, of course, we don't yet know the charges recommended by the grand jury, but what are the possibilities?
Yes, Lindsay, I am looking for 4 things when this indictment is unsealed. So first is whether this is a misdemeanor or a felony. The base charge, falsification of business records, which it looks like it likely is, can be either a misdemeanor or it can be bumped up to a felony. That's the second thing, is if it's bumped up to a felony, what is the legal theory? As Terry just mentioned, it could involve campaign finance, it could involve tax fraud, or it could involve something else. But we want to know what is the felony crime that they are tying this to if they're bumping it up. The third thing I'm looking for is what is the evidence of Trump's intent? Remember that to prosecute someone for a crime, they not only have to have committed a criminal act, you have to show that they did it with the state of mind that they intended to do that. And this is the hardest element to prove often, especially in white collar cases. So we'll need to see how the prosecutors know or have trying to prove the state of mind. And finally, I think we want to see what's new. The DA's office has been looking at this since 2018 when Michael Cohen was prosecuted. And I think it'll be interesting to see what new evidence since then surfaced to make this a stronger case and to change the Manhattan DA's mind in terms of bringing this.
You just suggested that it is difficult in white-collar cases. I am curious, just to give you, to give us a sense of the difficulty of the job facing these prosecutors in getting a conviction against former President Trump.
Well, they're going to need witnesses that are credible. And I think one of the things that was holding the Manhattan DA's office back for a while was that a primary witness was Michael Cohen, and that, without corroboration, he might not be able to win the case on his own. This is someone who has been convicted, who's been convicted of lying. So we'll want to see what other evidence that what Cohen testifies to can be corroborated. I think the other important thing here is going to be documentary evidence. You can't argue with a paper trail. And so I think a big strength of this case will really depend on how much documentary evidence that they have brought. But again, I think a lot of it may come down to conversations, witnesses who can testify to conversations that they've heard in terms of what was the agreement that was reached that led to these hush money payments. And we know that prosecutors were also talking to witnesses about the Susan McDougal payment, which was also, this was a Playboy star who was also had her story buried by the National Enquirer. Whether this was part of a larger scheme, and again, that goes to the intent that this wasn't just one-off thing to protect Trump from embarrassment, but really a larger thing related to increasing his chances in the 2016 election.
Senior lecturer at Yale Jackson Institute for Global Affairs and former FBI agent Asha Rankapa, we thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now let's bring in Kate Shaw, an ABC News legal contributor. Kate, same question to you that I just asked Asha there. I want to pose that. While we won't see the indictment until it's unsealed at some point, do we have any idea what might be in it?
I think I agree with most of what Asha said in that it is very likely that the anchor charge is this falsification of business records state law charge. The real question is what else is in the indictment that might bump that up to a felony? And I think Asha rightly points out there is maybe a universe of potential information. The grand jury has been hard at work, hearing from many witnesses, some of whom we know about, some of whom we may not know about. And so potentially payments to another party, potentially tax offenses, potentially one of these campaign finance violations. So, there is a range of possibilities. And I think the strength of the case that we are likely to see the Manhattan DA put on, is going to be a little bit hard to assess until we know what the specific charges are. But you have to imagine that they are confident that they have a very strong set of witnesses and documentary evidence before they're going to take this, very significant step of seeking an indictment against a former president for the first time.
How do you think that this will impact other pending investigations against the former president?
I think that probably they're happening in complete isolation. So, of course, we have the federal investigation by the special counsel who is looking into both Mar-a-Lago documents and various aspects of January 6th. And, of course, we also have the Fulton County investigation regarding various election crimes in Georgia. And, I think that if there were one architect of all of these investigations, maybe they would have sequenced the announcement of the first indictment differently. Probably they would have. But I think that these investigative bodies and individuals are operating independently, and rightly so. So I actually think there isn't and there shouldn't be any impact on those other investigations, which I imagine are going to continue apace.
If I can just get you 10 seconds or less, we've been talking about these witnesses. Michael Cohen, you think he's a credible witness, even though he is a convicted liar?
Oh, he's a very problematic witness. I'm sure the Manhattan DA is very well aware of that. I'm sure they will rely on him, but I'm quite sure that there is more than Michael Cohen that they have to offer, or they wouldn't be confident that they could go forward and get a conviction.
Kate Shaw, our thanks to you as always. And ABC News continues to following breaking news. Former President Donald Trump has been indicted by a Manhattan grand jury. Stick with us.
Whenever news breaks,
the crushing families here in Poland.
Here in Kentucky, no match for the tornado.
From Monterey Park, California, on the ground in Ukraine.
Reporting from Uvalde, Texas, ABC News Live is right there everywhere.
From the scene of that deadly missile strike in Dnipro, Ukraine. Reporting from the earthquake in Turkey.
From Charleston, South Carolina, on the 2024 campaign trail.
From Kathmandu, Nepal.
In Truckee, California, covering record snowfall.
Traveling with the president in Mexico City.
Wherever the story.
Here at this airport in Tampa, it's already shut down.
Reporting with the nurses on the picket line.
Reporting from Jerusalem.
Here at 10 Downing Street in London.
Streaming live to you.
Wherever the story is.
Wherever the story is.
Wherever the story is. We're going to take you there.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live. Streaming free everywhere. America's #1 streaming news.
With so much
much happening these days, it's hard to keep up.
Things change hour by hour, minute by minute.
The historic weather that's now unfolding.
The worries on Wall Street.
We're bringing you the Right Now. That a nationwide teacher shortage.
The Right Now look at the day ahead. An alert this morning for dog owners and the key takeaways from the biggest stories.
World News Now and America This Morning, America's #1 early morning news.
Today does feel a little different. Early mornings on ABC News Live.
Brooke Shields, the most photographed woman in the world.
Iconic American beauty.
A sexualized child model.
Exploitation. Vulnerable. She was catapulted into the world of adult sexuality.
I'm amazed that I survived any of it. What happened to her isn't really about her, it's just about women. I was just born with this face. I wanted to think about the things that could have happened without beauty.
University of Utah senior Lauren McCluskey repeatedly asked for help.
It was like getting hit by a baseball bat.
You have a powerful institution.
And you have the audacity to try to cover your ass.
Friday night.
A lot of troubling information was never public until now.
Never before seen surveillance video, exclusive interviews.
I'm sorry, I couldn't protect their daughter.
The stunning investigation.
Could Lauren's life have been saved?
Friday at 9/8 Central on ABC.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
Yeah. So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do? Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 2 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
From America's #1 news source comes the all-new ABC News app. Breaking news, incredible video, faster, smarter, and it can customize to you and your interests. If you love being in the know, you're gonna love this. Experience what all the buzz is about. Experience the all-new ABC News app. Download it now.
Reporting from Monterey Park, California, I'm Robin Roberts. Wherever the story is, we're going to take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Welcome back to Prime. We've been reporting on that historic news. Donald Trump, now the first former U.S. president to be indicted on a crime. We'll bring you further developments on that in just a bit. But first, some of the other big stories that we've dominating today's headlines. 9 service members are killed in one of the deadliest days for the U.S. military on American soil after 2 Black Hawk helicopters went down during a training mission. What we're now learning about the crash. The accident took place around 10 o'clock Wednesday night while 2 Black Hawk choppers were on a routine drill using night vision goggles. The choppers came down in a field about 30 miles from Fort Campbell. 4 soldiers were in one, 5 in the other. Fortunately, no lives or property were threatened on the ground. The names of the fallen soldiers are being withheld while their families are notified. Our Chief Global Affairs anchor Martha Raddatz leads us off.
2 Black Hawks down, 9 soldiers dead. The 2 helicopters from the 101st Airborne Division were on what was called a routine training mission. But routine military training is inherently dangerous, especially at night. All of the pilots and crew on this mission, 5 soldiers in one helicopter, 4 in the other, were wearing night vision goggles, which makes it more difficult to see, especially peripherally, as they crossed over the Kentucky woods near a residential area just before 10 p.m.
We heard a loud boom and just all of a sudden the engines quit and everything was quiet. Both of them had crashed.
The debris was spread over a wide area. The Army cannot confirm yet whether the 2 collided, but that is likely what investigators will look at first.
Helicopters have big whirling blades that are like knives, and when they cut into another helicopter, it always ends in tragedy.
All 9 soldiers were based at Fort Campbell. Teams were immediately dispatched to inform the families, and an aircraft safety team has been sent to the crash site to investigate.